All right. Well, it is 12:01, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure there'll be some folks hopping on the call, but thank you all for taking the time today to join me. Please, as you know, I love interaction. So if you have questions or information or anything that you'd like to share, please participate. Makes it a whole lot more fun for everyone because today's topic is going to be doing business with Open Door. And this is not a call where I am disparaging Open Door at all. However, in the last few weeks, I've had some pretty interesting transactions with Open Door that I've had to get involved in, and I just think everybody should be made aware of what they may encounter if you're doing a transaction with Open Door. So if anybody on the call has had an Open Door transaction, great, love to hear about it. We've had many transactions with Open Door, and they've all been, fairly hassle-free. But for some reason, the last couple of weeks, I've had some interesting challenges with Open Door that I wanted to make you aware of. Because apparently they have been hiring a lot of new folks who may not be as savvy in terms of what they're doing as somebody more seasoned, and it's caused some issues in the office. So the first thing that I encountered, maybe about a month ago, was here in Decatur, and we had a transaction with Open Door that was supposed to close in about a week. And lo and behold, we found out through calling a closing attorney, and then another closing attorney contacted our agent and looking for some paperwork from them, and they're like, "Well, we're closing at another firm." So after doing some investigation, they found out that this particular agent had put the same property under contract with two different buyers and two different brokerages. And that was a real problem, obviously. But what wound up happening is that they didn't want to be sued, so they were very apologetic, admitted that they hired some new folks who may not be as savvy as they needed to be, and wound up paying our agent their full commission. And luckily, our buyer was willing to work with them, and she was an out-of-state buyer who had flown up here several times to look at this property and had invested a lot of time and money into this property prior to purchasing it. And they wound up settling with her for about, $8,000 or $9,000. So luckily, it wasn't a situation where the buyer was ready to sue, but they did settle, and they got reimbursed for all of their hard expenses, along with the release of their earnest money, obviously. So that was the first issue that we dealt with. And so I'm not quite sure. This information is just for you to be aware. It might be worth having a discussion with the listing agent to make sure that they don't have any other offers on the property, just as a safety precaution, because none of us want to get caught in that situation again, where we have a buyer that's like maybe 10 days out from closing, and they find out that the property is under contract with someone else as well. Any thoughts around that from you guys that are on the call? Nan, I see you're on the call. Any thoughts from you as a broker?
I haven't had much with Open Door. Ribbon has caused us some problems. But not anything with Open Door.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I said I haven't had any problems with Open Door, but I have had problems with Ribbon.
With Zillow?
Ribbon.
Oh, okay. What kind of problems have you encountered?
We've had cash offers that at the last minute they want to change it to FHA. And the only reason we took it in a multiple offer situation was that it was a cash offer. It's kind of that bait and switch sort of thing.
Yeah. That problem seems to surface more so than we'd like it to, honestly. Okay, let me tell you another story that I dealt with just about 2 weeks ago with Open Door, and this time it involved an appraisal special stip that the listing agent who represented Open Door took. And I've also had this special stipulation cause problems on non-Open Door transactions. And that is that the selling agent writes a special stipulation that says the buyer will pay X amount of dollars over the appraised value. And unfortunately, that in a couple of instances that I've dealt with recently, that appraised value has come in lower than the listing agent or the selling agent anticipated. And in one instance, well, in both instances, the seller said, we're not going to sell it for that price. So in the Open Door situation, I was able to get in contact with the regional broker because I just dealt with him on this other situation where they had accepted offers, they accepted 2 offers on the same property. So I had his contact information and I was able to get in touch with him. And he said, well, the listing agent is the one that's representing Open Door in this case. So it's really between them and you guys. And I'm like, well, that may be the case, but the seller of record on the contract is Open Door. And what we're being told is that the seller will not sell the property for the appraised value plus the difference in what the buyer was willing to pay over the appraised value per the contract. Long story short, we went back and forth a couple of times on that situation, and ultimately that seller sold the property about $45,000 less than what was agreed to on the purchase and sale agreement because of the special stipulation. So in the other case, which was a non-Open Door transaction, the seller refused to sell and now has been served from the buyer's side for not honoring their contract. And I guess the point of this whole conversation is, number one, if you are a listing agent and you have a special stipulation that's written that way on a contract, you better make sure that there's a minimum appraised value in that special stipulation, because guess what, guys? That special stipulation controls the exhibit. And legally, if it comes in $40,000, $50,000 lower than what anybody anticipated, that special stipulation controls, and you are bound to sell that property for that dollar figure plus whatever the difference was that was written in there that the buyer would pay above the appraised value. Now, as a listing agent, if you ever get a special stipulation that reads that way, the right thing to do would be to go back and say, as long as it appraises for at least this amount, okay, to protect your seller. So if you've got a $400,000 transaction and you have an appraisal gap special stipulation, in order to protect your seller, you need to have a minimum appraised value in that special stipulation before you accept it. In other words, it must appraise for at least what, for 385, 390, whatever the seller is willing to allow, that would get them the net that they want to get on that transaction. Otherwise, you're obligated to sell it for whatever the appraisal comes in at, plus the difference, which is generally, you know, $5,000 or $6,000, maybe $10,000. Generally is what I see in contracts. Does that make sense? Y'all are awfully quiet today.
Yes, that does make sense.
Thank you. So the moral of the story is, be very, very careful if you are a listing agent or a buying agent, and you're working with any seller really, but I thought it was prudent to bring the open door discussion to the table today, because we had two incidences really back to back with them. One turned out, well, they both turned out okay, but it caused a lot of emotional issues with the agents and the buyers, and you know, and of course one buyer agreed to move on to another property because she got reimbursed for all of her expenses. I think that was an exception, not the rule, because as you know, most buyers are going to want to go after that seller for damages, and they want that property. So I think that having this type of information in the back of your mind when you're working with, you know, these companies that are representing sellers, is good information to have, just so that you don't get yourself caught in a similar situation. Neither were really the fault of our agents, but you know, we are here to make sure that the buyers and sellers have a very positive experience. And of course, neither one of these were very positive. So, so that's what I wanted to bring up today in this chat. Anyone else have anything else they'd like to bring up today, either on the topic or any other type of topic that we can address with you? I see Deborah's on the call. Hi, Deborah Blue.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Barbara Dwyer.
Good afternoon. How is everyone? And
Barbara,
happy
you always
Sunday.
have some topic you'd like to discuss. I just know you're ready to bring something up. So I'm here willing, able, and ready to talk to you about it.
You're right, Tom, I do, because I'm not sure if everyone heard, but did you guys hear that Zillow has gotten out of the iBuyer business?
Yes.
That's gonna be really good.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, guys. Zillow is out of the iBuyer because they pride themselves on I know you've all had clients who said, "Well, Zillow said my property was worth this," and it's usually always way above what it's worth. But now you actually have a rebuttal to them because they don't know how to price property, and that's why they're sitting with I don't know how much in inventory, but so much in inventory that they can't sell because
7,000
they didn't know
homes.
how to price the property to begin with when they purchased it, and then they went to resell it. The price was just not it was not a doable price. So they're sitting with all this inventory. So they, in fact, do not know how to price property properly. And that's why they're getting out of that business. So I think that is, all of this is about having ammunition in your back pocket. Okay. Just like the Open Door situation. I don't want anybody to badmouth Open Door or Zillow, but you can say, my broker has had issues with them taking, putting the same property under contract with two different buyers. My broker has had issues with them not wanting to sell because the appraisal came in too low. So I think this is all great information for you guys as professionals to have in your in your chest of information to help yourself get more listings and work with buyers in a more efficient way.
I'm sorry. With that being said, that says to me that they're not very familiar with our contracts. If they're using our contracts, I don't know if they're using our contracts or if they're using their own contracts. But if they're using our GAR contracts for these purchases, then they definitely are in violation.
Now, I'm sorry, Barbara, I'm having a little echo here with another computer. Let me. Okay. Now, who's using the 2019 forms, Deborah?
Unfortunately, they're using the 2019 contracts. So whenever I do a transaction with them, I update the forms. There's nothing wrong with mixing forms to stay in compliance. A lot of times people will ask me, oh, this agent's using the RE form and we use the GAR form. You can mix forms. And keep in mind, we're on 2021, about to go into a 2022 contract. So therefore, can you imagine what's missing from the 2019 to 2021 for protection? So always counter with your 2021 contract or soon to be 2022, or add the necessary compliance forms that our Heart of Atlanta will be requiring.
Right. Yeah. And I've seen this issue recently more than I care to, and that is with these outdated forms, because in January 30th or 31st of 2022, the 2021 forms become null and void. So you cannot use those. Now, if you've got a binding contract already in play that is on a 2021 form, it will go through to closing. However, if you've got a listing and the seller's disclosure is on a 2021 form, you must update that form to a 2022 form if that property is not under contract.
That is correct, Tom. And if I get a contract or an offer, one of the first things I look for, especially on our GAR, is I look to see what the date is of the contract, the document that they're using, and I also check to see whose name is in that in the bottom of that document, because whoever is writing that offer, their name should be the one that's at the bottom of the document.
Yeah. I don't know, Deborah, have you signed up yet for the 2022 GAR form changes?
Yep, it's the end of this month.
Yeah, I'm going on Monday after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that's the same day.
All right, cool. So we'll be able to come to you guys shortly thereafter, and probably either in late December or early January with some classes on the GAR form updates. Depending on, how severe. Last year, they really weren't that significant, except for a few forms. But we'll be able to come with you and update those with you here shortly. Anyone else have anything they'd like to talk about this morning?
How about empty grocery store shelves?
How about what?
Empty grocery store shelves.
I'm sorry. It's either I'm having an issue on my end. I'm not able to hear what you're saying.
I was really just making a joke, Tom, that the grocery store shelves are pretty empty.
I do have a question. What I've noticed in showing homes that are listed with virtual brokerages, that the homes are not very clean. So I just wanted to know if that's been an experience with other agents or brokers. I'm just noticing that they're really not clean at all. Almost, it's like someone just moved out and now they're selling it.
A clean home is the exception rather than the rule these days, it seems. In my neighborhood, anyway. It's a seller's market. I don't think they feel they need to clean the home, so people are buying them anyway.
Y'all, I'm having some technical difficulties with the audio on my new laptop.
I'll jump in while you're working on that, Tom.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah, the guys, you're right. We've sometimes home training, that's the best way I can say it, is, I personally would never sell a home without cleaning it for the next person. And what I mean by that is making it at least that they could have a pizza and sleep in the house the night and they could do their own cleaning. But all the seller has to do is put a lockbox on, put a sign in the yard and sell it. There's nothing saying that they have to give it a steam cleaning and so on and so forth. So that's why we have a special STIP, and the number escapes me, but if you look at your special STIP index, you'll find it, which gets very specific about what you want the house to be. Unfortunately, the house being dirty while you're looking at the house is probably not the best light to put that home in to get a good offer, because guess what? Your buyer is going to have an impression about the house. And when it doesn't show as well, what happens? You get lower offers. So just know that if you're on the other end of that and you're the listing agent, I can understand if it's an old home that's going to be renovated and there's not a whole lot you can do. But if it's just a regular home and people are just moving out, and leaving it, then if you represent the buyer, I would definitely make sure you put the special STIP in that they clean it. And that special step says more than just broom sweep. It says, you know, professionally clean the carpets, or, you know, clean out the appliances, or whatever it is your buyer says. So that really would be something that the buyer's agent, you know, try to overlook that. If the house has good bones and it meets the criteria of the buyer and it's just dirty, then just make sure you cover your buyer in a special step.
Yeah, don't assume that anybody's going to do anything outside of what the written word is in the contract.
Thank you very much, because I know what a property that I listed that was really important to show the property, even in this great seller market during the summer. You know, it just it makes a big difference when you're going in, looking and showing property. And I've just really noticed it more with the virtual brokerages. I noticed, like, if I walk into a Keller or maybe another company's brokerage, they're normally showing very well, they're clean enough, you know what I'm saying? But I've just kind of noticed with a lot of the virtuals, when I walk in immediately, you know, I'm like, wow, they even try to clean a little bit. But thank you.
What else is on your mind today, guys? I want to mention something that I got a phone call just a few minutes ago about Earnest Money. And I know we talk a lot about Earnest Money, but I don't think we can ever talk enough about Earnest Money, quite frankly. But had an agent who just called because the buyer never turned in the Earnest Money. And now the due diligence is over and they wanted to terminate the contract. He wasn't quite sure what to do. So as a real estate professional, it is your job to ensure that the earnest money is collected and deposited per the contract. Okay. So in this case, they did notify the seller that the buyer had not turned in the earnest money, which was a good thing, because had they not, then and this buyer terminates after due diligence with no other contingencies, and the seller is due those funds, guess who's on the hook for it? The broker. And because we never notified the other party that we had not collected it. Now, in this case, they did notify the other party. The other party did not terminate the contract, which was their option at that time. And so therefore they agreed to move forward with no earnest money. So if you notify the other party that you haven't collected the earnest money and they demand that it be collected and deposited, and the buyer doesn't do that, within 3 days, the seller can terminate the contract, or they can move forward with no earnest money. So that's what the contract says. But please note that if you don't follow up and make sure that the other party has been notified, if the earnest money has not been sent as per the contract, the broker is on the hook for those funds to the party who should be getting them. And ultimately, it's probably going to come out of your next commission check. So please be very careful about that and understand. That's why I always preach, and I know Deborah backs me up on this 100%, is that the best contract is when you have collected those earnest money funds and sent a copy of that with your offer. That is your best offer. And then that way you've got the funds in hand, or they have been wired, but all of this needs to be discussed and handled up front when you're having a buyer consultation. If you're representing a buyer, all that should be discussed up front. So it should be no surprise. You know, I see a lot of contracts that have a binding agreement date and the earnest money is going to be collected 5 days after binding agreement date. Well, that's not a really good contract. There's no skin in the game for the buyer at all at that point in time. So your best contract is to collect those funds when you're writing the offer, send a copy of the check or a copy of the wire where it's been received by the office, and send your offer in that way. But please note that if the earnest money funds are not received per the contract, the way the contract's written, and the buyer terminates the contract and are in default because due diligence has expired and there's no other contingencies that have to be met, then the broker's on the hook for those funds. Are there any questions about that?
I do have a question.
Sure.
So I heard that being said, you know, that it's the best thing to go ahead and have the earnest money at the time of the offer. So that makes things easier and it's a better contract. My question is, so say you put the earnest money with your broker for the offer that you're putting in, that's fine. And then that offer falls through. And now 1 day later, they want to put an offer in somewhere else. And the seller is preferring for the earnest money to be held with their closing attorney that they're closing with for whatever reason. Now that earnest money is already with, you know, Keller Williams Atlanta Midtown. And I'm just wondering how it works when you have to change the location of the earnest money in case you don't win the offer. And how the time plays into you negotiating contracts.
Well, that's a really good question. And what I would say is you're always best to turn in your earnest money to the broker as soon as practically possible. That's what the license law says. But that doesn't mean that we have to deposit it. So I would, and I know that each office has a different way of handling earnest money, and we're in the process of trying to, you know, streamline that and make it a little more streamlined between all of the 6 Heart of Atlanta Group offices. But you can certainly turn in your earnest money with the earnest money deposit form and let the MCA know that you don't want it deposited because you don't have an accepted contract yet. And then once you have an accepted contract, then they can deposit the earnest money. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 is if it's been deposited with, did you say like Midtown, and it wants to be held in another market center?
Yeah, if it's being held in Midtown, but they want it to be held with Wiseman attorneys at law or something.
Yeah,
because they're closing with them, maybe.
the license law says that earnest money, those funds have to be released, and we have to collect new funds for whoever the new holder is.
Okay.
Now, you could go under, you could write your offer and in a special stipulation said the earnest money funds are currently have been deposited with Keller Williams Midtown. And then you could amend the contract when you go binding, and all parties would agree that those funds are going to be released and transferred to whoever the new holder is going to be, if it's a closing attorney or if it's another market center.
Okay.
So that's option number 2. If I can't reiterate, guys, how important it is if a closing attorney is holding funds, the F510, which is the agreement, and the F511, which is that the closing attorney is holding the earnest money funds, both those documents need to be a part of your contract. I generally see the form that says the closing attorney is going to be the holder of the earnest money, but there's the one, I think it's the F510, which is the agreement, has not been signed. And I've had instances, guys, where a party was supposed to get the earnest money because the other party defaulted. And the closing attorney told me they never signed the agreement, and therefore they're just going to return the funds to the buyer. The seller should have gotten them. That's why it's important to get that agreement signed by the closing attorney, because I have had instances where they've said, well, I never agreed to hold it. And they use that as an out to not have to make a decision. And I will also tell you that we love our closing attorneys. So if you have a favorite attorney that you like to use, great. But if you're a listing agent and you let some closing attorney hold funds that you don't know, and there's a default between the parties, it's very difficult for them to, I mean, I had an incident recently where an attorney was holding and they didn't want to make a decision about the disbursement. And so they decided to interplead the funds. And it was a very clear-cut decision, but their reason was, well, there's a dispute over it. We don't want to get in the middle of a dispute. Well, guess what? That's what the holder of the earnest money has to determine. If there's a dispute, we know there's a dispute. Otherwise, they would have signed the termination and we would have dispersed the funds. But there's always a dispute if the termination doesn't get signed. That's not a reason to interplead funds. That's a cop-out. And so you need to be very, very cognizant, and you need to be very, very careful about a closing attorney who you have no relationship with holding funds for your client. Any questions about that? Okay, and I believe that with open door contracts, the closing attorney, whoever they are, generally in their contracts, they're the holder of the earnest money funds. Anyone else?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to share with everyone that, number one, happy Thanksgiving week, but to remember that we are in fourth quarter. We have quite a few holidays. When you're writing your offers and accepting offers, make sure you look at your calendar and things are not falling on Christmas or Christmas Eve, Thanksgiving Day, day after Thanksgiving. A lot of firms are closed both days, not guaranteed, but typically. Just pay attention to those timelines on your contract. And if you already have made that error, know that the contract says if you fall on a weekend or holiday, then the closing date will be the next business day, which would be that Monday. So just pay attention to that. We get busy and we're moving fast and we're packing to go out of town and we're writing contracts, and we don't look at that calendar and count those days to make sure we don't land on one of those holidays. So I just wanted to give a reminder out to everyone.
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion. And thank you, Deborah, for bringing that to everybody's attention. Please, please look at your calendar dates, but do know that in the contract that none of the dates in that contract move, so to speak, due to them falling on a holiday, Saturday or Sunday, except for the date of closing. So if your due diligence ends on Thanksgiving Day, you better make sure that the day before you're addressing whatever needs to be addressed, or you're going to be working on Thanksgiving Day. And guess what? The other party may not be. And so just be cognizant of that. Great, Deborah. Thank you so much. All right, guys, y'all are very quiet today. And unless somebody else has something they'd like to bring up while you've got myself and Deborah Blue and Nan Ellington on the call, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you very much for joining us. And I hope and wish everyone a wonderful Thanksgiving. Have a safe travel experience. If you're traveling, enjoy your family, friends, or whoever you're going to be with. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom and Deborah. Happy holidays.